Worldviews. Worldviews are the grids. They are the lenses through which we frame all of reality, the paradigm from which everything actually emerges. And the stories I've told you are real stories, and what happens 9 times out of 10, the particulars of a story are extrapolated into a meta-narrative and becomes the bigger picture of all of life itself for these individuals. So they are really worldviews in the making, in their youth and in their younger days and in their cultures. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about how one deals with issues such as these. How did we get where we are in America today? I think the biggest danger America lives with is the failure to recognize that if the worldview that framed her is abandoned, the worldview that she thinks she is espousing will not be strong enough to withstand the assaults of counter perspectives. If she will not be able to withstand the assaults of counter-perspectives, Europe and other vast subcontinents that have gone the way of rabid secularism are flirting with extinction. It is happening before our eyes. Islam will not allow a totally secularized society. And if you look at the growth rate alone and the birth rate, sort of 1 to 8, for the non-Muslim world to the Muslim world, you can begin to see that the numbers alone are stacked against the naturalistic framework, and there is not even going to be a shadow of a chance by the time 2020 and 2030 come around. Europe and all, the way Europe has known itself, will be a thing of the past. Muammar Gaddafi said this in the last 6 months. Why are we blowing up bombs? Why are we killing people? 1 or 2 generations and it'll be ours anyway. So Gaddafi makes this cynical comment about the reality that we face. When the worldview is framed, the first impact, of course, is culture. Now, culture is an effort to find a coherent set of answers to the existential questions that confront all of us in the passages of our lives. It is an effort to find a coherent set of answers to the existential questions that confront all of us in the passages of our lives. So the culture within which you are born frames a series of answers to the existential questions that confront you in the passage of your life. And what happens, I think, in this mix of the world right now, in the intertravel and the back and forth that we go through, is that cultures are coming into contact with each other. And contrary to Milton Friedman, the world is not flat. The world is tilted. It is tilted. When I was boarding the plane in Delhi, there was a Western gentleman in front of me, and by this point we were in our 3rd checkpoint, and they just about, the only thing they don't ask you to do is sort of take all of your clothes off, but they may as well. They go through all of this stuff, and we were in the 3rd one, and with my ailing back, it's really a problem. But he looked and, and the thing is, India is the most courteous culture in the world when you're a guest in the home, and all of that courtesy is lost the moment you get into the car and get onto the road. You've had it. One of my friends says India will never need a Disney World because we just have taxis. That's all we need. We just drive like maniacs. And you can stand in line, and if you look for the left for a minute, instead of being 2nd in line, you'll be 10th in line. People just go past you, shove past you, and then all of a sudden they don't understand the language. And the guy in front of me just, he put his arms up, poor guy. He was all of a sudden, he was 10 in front of him. And he said to me, I don't know what to do out here. I said, hang with me, I'll get you through here now. He said, thank you so much. And he said, I have to be very careful out here. He said, a few minutes ago, I was so far ahead in line and all of a sudden got so far behind. And I just made the comment saying, boy, I guess it's a different world. And the guy behind me got so irate, he was all of a sudden using 4-letter words. He said, basically, lump it, eat it, just the way it is. And I thought to myself, it is very interesting how culture has shifted. When the Easterner comes to the West, he can openly criticize the West. But when the Westerner goes to the East, you had better be very, very careful how you critique Eastern culture. This is real. This is real. And when I get onto television programs and all of that and say that in the public eye and say that to them, that I've crossed both East and West and these are the differences I notice, the silence for some time, the world has become tilted. And now with the confluence and the emergence of various worldviews that we are coming up against, one over against each other, the question is emerging of truth and domination. On the one hand, they will say, what you believe is not true. What we believe is true. And the end result is dominating a culture with your own worldview rather than allowing that other worldview to dominate you in some way. So it starts off with an existential answer to the undeniable questions in your life. And then when it comes into collision, the conflict between truth and domination actually arises. And what I want to show to you is why it is in the West we are in the weakest we have ever been in understanding these two issues of truth and of domination, what this really means. First, a brief look at the past of what brought us to this point. Let me take you through 4 or 5 stages. If you go back into the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries, you'll see the Renaissance, or I think as the English more correctly call it, Renaissance, something like that. I remember listening to Don Cupid always talking about the Renaissance and sat through several lectures of his on that. But you go through the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries in this, and man became the measure of all things. Man was to be the measuring point in a self-referencing authoritarian stance. That was shown in the arts, that was shown in literature, whether it was Boccaccio or Dante or whatever it was, whoever it was, you began to see that there was this puffed chest sense that we will get there pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And what happened in the 19th century with the Romantic poets was really in the sequence of events from man becoming the measure. Romantic poets actually used the term like man is born again. They were using terms with self-referencing authority. So the Renaissance brought about the measurement level being within man himself. But you move from there over to rationalism. From man being the measure, you move to the time of René Descartes in the 16th and the early 17th centuries. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. What Descartes really should have strictly said, I think, therefore thinking exists. That's really what he should have said. I think, therefore thinking exists. But it went to a rationalistic interpretation of the world with a capital R, and the only thing you could be certain of was that you existed, because in order to deny your existence, you had to actually exist to deny it, and thinking existed, therefore you existed, and mathematics became the only certain science. So you move from man becoming the measure, coming in the arts and literature, to the idea of mathematical certainty, and man became a thinking being. From man being a self-referencing being, man became a thinking being. You moved from there over into the 17 and 1800s, and people like David Hume and others who went into the empirical mode made man an empirical being. The only thing you could be certain of is what happened in the laboratory. Man became the measure. Rationalism came, and only mathematics became the most certain discipline. David Hume comes along and says, the only thing you could be certain, here's the statement he takes. If we take in our hands any volume of divinity or school metaphysics, for instance, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing nothing but sophistry and illusion. Hume's suggestion that meaningful statements are either mathematical or scientific raises a question right from the beginning, because his definition itself is neither mathematical nor scientific. It is a metaphysical pronouncement about these certainties. And so you move from man being the measure to the rational certainty that man sought only in the field of mathematics, to the ideas of the science lab and empirical certainty, and naturalism was sort of waiting to be born. It was not at all surprising that the metaphysicians like Immanuel Kant, who were influenced by David Hume and so on, ultimately became skeptics on metaphysical matters. Skepticism writ large, you cannot be certain about any metaphysical pronouncement. That started off with things like ethics and morality and so on, till ultimately God was evicted himself. And on the heels of people like David Hume coming to us in the 18th century, 19th century, the higher critical theories and all of that came into being born. By the time the 20th century came and liberal theologians were reigning supreme in the seminaries, God's word was no longer treated with any authority, because to even talk about God, you cannot be certain in any sense whatsoever. So man became a skeptical being. It is interesting that you move from rationalism all the way to empiricism, to skepticism. Existentialism was waiting to be born. Their passions, the will, the feelings, the emotions were sort of all of a sudden watching from the stands this game being played out for who was going to provide the centerpiece for truth and certainty. Are they going to allow mathematics to dominate the field? Are they going to allow the sciences to dominate the field? So people like Sartre and Camus and all came on the scene. They were absolutely brilliant. They did not philosophize systematically. They philosophized by telling stories. And people latched onto the story, identified with the story. Whether you're reading Camus' The Stranger, or you're reading Sartre's No Exit, you begin to see yourself in that story. And there's a severance that takes place between what you think out here and what you feel down here. Let's face it, the taxi drivers that I drive with feel, they want, but they can never engage the kinds of people I have already mentioned to you at the level of engagement that people want to have certainty. And what has happened by and large, there's been a cleavage in the modern experience where the intellectual elite have hijacked the notion of truth, and the masses who cannot engage them at that level are left only with their stories and their feelings. And who is going to take on the Hitchens and the Dawkins and the others that have come with a two-fisted attack? I don't know how many of you have read Robert Price's book, The Reason-Driven Life. I mean, he just, don't waste your money on it. Go to the library, pick it up and read it, you know. Robert Price was a student at Gordon Conwell. He brags about the fact that when he graduated, Billy Graham was the speaker, and he refers to himself as an ex-fundie, an ex-fundamentalist, and he goes on to basically tell us evangelical Christians are basically an immature lot of people who have never come of age and never learned to think rationally and think reasonably. He just cuts us down at the knees, goes on and on and on in every chapter, hitting very hard. He went on to get 2 PhDs after he began to struggle with his faith. I suspect mainly to be able to attack the faith, because one of them was in New Testament studies. Who's going to engage them? With what degree of certainty can you come when God is being assaulted from the metaphysical side? It is a meaningless statement. From the empirical side, it is not measurable in any setting. From the rational certainty side, it does not fit into mathematics. But existentially, we are driven and driven and driven, story after story after story. And so they basically say, if that's what you want, it's good enough for you, but don't ever try to tell us it actually stands the test of reason. You and I are immediate suspects in any discussion if we even hint of the fact that the category of evangelical or Christian can be put beside us, taking the word of God at face value.